for generations.
Dates in the Bible don't quite match the marriage certificate. Uh-oh.
And welcome, Genies, to another round of Extreme Genes, America's family history show on ExtremeGenes.com. My name is Fisher. I am your radio root sleuth on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. I can't believe we're to the end of July and into the beginning of August. Coming up here in just a few minutes, we're going to talk to Brant Gibson. He's with Legacy Tree Genealogists, one of our great sponsors, talking about and sharing some of the great stories that he has from discoveries he's made for certain clients. You're going to love what he's got to share with you. And then later in the show, one of the guys who's just emerged from out of nowhere is one of the giants in our space. Jonny Perl, the creator of DNA Painter, is going to be on. He's going to talk a little about the history of what got him going in it, some of the latest innovations on the site, how you can use it to help you in your research, and how you can just have some fun seeing how all your DNA kind of matches up with a little chromosome painting on DNA Painter. And if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, we invite you to do so at extremegenes.com or on our Facebook page. Right now, it's time to check in with David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David.
Ian, how are you, sir?
I am great. I'm getting ready to go on a little trip out to a national park in California here in a few days. So next week, we're going to take a break, share one of our classic rewinds, and get back at it right after that. But I'm so looking forward to getting out and having some fun on the road.
The road is always fun to be on, especially when you're driving and not walking or thumbing.
Yes, yes, exactly right. Good
glad
point.
You're going someplace with a car.
Yeah.
Well, you know, my ancestor back in 1812 didn't actually have a car to go to Plattsburgh, New York, but I got my membership certificate today in the mail. This huge certificate from the General Society of the War of 1812, because I'm now a life member with Massachusetts. I'm really excited about it. Of course, I have a new word on the document that I had to explain to my children.
Which is?
Artificer.
Really?
Do I have to explain it to you?
Yeah, go ahead. You've done it before. I've not heard that word.
It's okay. It's essentially somebody who is skilled in carpentry, and he was in the light artillery, and essentially if the cannon carriage broke or something needed to be repaired, he was there.
Really?
So he served with the U.S. light artillery from 1813 to 1815. And now I have a certificate.
The only thing I'm concerned with, Dave, if it's a lifetime certificate, then when you die, do they come and take the certificate back?
No, I'm being buried with it.
No.
Well, that way at least I can be an interesting archaeological find.
All right, let's get on with our family histoire news, David. Where do you want to start?
You know, in 2021, if you want to get rid of a photograph, you basically delete it off your smartphone or your digital camera. Back in 1891, it wasn't so much the same way. You had a glass negative. And if you had thousands of them, well, there might be something that someone had to take care of. In 2020, a local photographer here in Massachusetts got a phone call that somebody was dumping 4,000 antique glass negatives and wanted to know if she wanted them before she threw them in the trash.
Oh, wow.
Well, I can tell you that Terry Capucci originally thought, probably not. Well, she relented, and now she has them all. Some of these images are amazing. And this is a story that was in the Boston Globe. And the sharpness of these photographs from the glass negatives will blow your mind.
What time period are we talking here?
1860s to the early part of the 1900s.
That's fantastic. What a great find. And I'm glad she said yes. Those are not things to be lost. And besides, she could donate it to organizations like yours or other places in Boston if she didn't want to deal with them.
Right. Most of them are for Western Massachusetts, and sadly, the paper envelopes that a lot of them have don't say the names or the dates, so there's a lot of speculation. So people out there might be looking at an ancestor when they look at the article and just not know.
Wow.
You know, occasionally police will find somebody who has committed a crime from a long time ago because somebody's a cousin, they get that DNA match. Yeah, well, this person committed an assault a number of years ago, and he submitted his DNA for genealogical purposes to a testing company. Guess what? He's now arrested for an assault that occurred back in the early 2000s. He must have forgot.
Maybe so. Where does he live?
He lives in Florida.
Oh, well, that explains it all. So there you go.
He has a smaller room now, though. Right here. I love the story that you shared with me about the 6 World War II innovations that changed everyday life. I mean, that includes flu vaccines, penicillin.
Yeah.
There's so many things how about jet engines? If we didn't have World War II, we probably wouldn't be jetting around, and who knows how long it would have actually taken to appear. And there's other things like blood plasma transfusions, electronic computers. Yeah, back in World War II.
Yeah, this has really brought all these things along. Although I wouldn't say that I'd rather had the war so we could have these things. I wish they had just kind of developed in their own due time.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing that's on the radar, that's radar. And that was developed during World War II as well.
Wow.
The idea that I want to get a metal detector and go out on the beach and hopefully find treasure and not just find crushed aluminum cans has always been a problem. And in the Isle of Man, they found another Viking hoard. And this goes back to the 11th century, Fish, with coins from Ireland and England and Germany, and of course some minted on the Isle of Man. And there were over 87 coins, 13 pieces of cut silver, arm rings, and other associated objects. And they believe that the man that had it just basically decided to bury it in the ground because that's what they did back then.
That's what they did.
Away their treasure. Yeah. It didn't go to the bank, so. Well, apparently he forgot where he buried it.
Yeah. Or he died before anybody else found out where he buried it.
Well, the Vikings found him immediately after he buried it. Well, that's all I have from my side of the world here. Signing off from Beantown, but don't forget that if you're not a member of American Ancestors, we'd love to have you, and you can save $20 on membership and use the coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org.
All right, David, thank you so much. We will talk to you again in a little bit at the back end of the show as we get back to Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to have one of the DNA specialists from our fine sponsors over at Legacy Tree Genealogists talking about some of the discoveries he's made for some of his clients. Some amazing stories. You're going to want to hear those when we return. Coming up in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Anytime is a great time to learn more about your family. Did you miss Roots Tech Connect this year? It's not too late to experience Roots Tech classes, keynotes, and how-to content. Just visit rootstech.org to see what you missed and to experience Roots Tech Connect on your own timetable. Select inspiring and insightful messages that will help you in your pursuit to connect with and share your family story in new ways. You can then use the free resources found at FamilySearch.org or the Family Search Family Tree app to have a deeper personal experience getting to know your family, past and present. Connecting with family and learning about your ancestors provides healing, peace, and a sense of belonging. And it's easy to share what you learn with others to help and inspire them as well. Visit rootstech.org for some inspiration or visit FamilySearch.org to continue on your journey of family discovery today. Hey Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry have big news. They've completely redesigned the Ancestry mobile app. Now more than ever, the Ancestry app is your Genie travel companion. Check out their new photo line feature where your photos are turned into an amazing collage you can share on social media. Under Discover, check out your daily picks that shows you the most relevant hints to your research and stories and photos that may be on other people's family trees. You can also click on Pick Up Where You Left Off to see the last person you are working on. And all of this works in sync with your desktop at home. And in sync with newspapers.com, find out what happened on this day in history. And if you want to know what happened on a given day in your family history, use the new widget, Events in Your Family Tree, that gives you ancestral birth dates, death anniversaries, and wedding anniversaries. Plus, check out the Maps feature that ties to your family history. Download the new Ancestry mobile app today.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogist has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogist is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, back on the job at Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. I am Fisher, your radio root sleuth, and everywhere I go since we started Extreme Genes back in 2013, I hear from people saying, I love the stories. I love the stories. Well, this week, we got Brant Gibson on the line. He's a researcher on the DNA team over at our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogists. And Brant has stories, and I thought we'd share at least a couple of them with you today. Brant, welcome back. It's great to have you.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
You know, as a DNA specialist, you get to put together all kinds of different cases, these little jigsaw puzzles. And as I always tell people, you know, with a regular jigsaw puzzle, when you're done, you break it up, you throw it back in the box, you put it on a shelf in a closet, and that's it. But when you put together a DNA jigsaw puzzle, it's framed, it's put on the wall, everybody talks about it forevermore. And you got a couple of great stories that I think people are going to be talking about in their families for a long time to come. Let's start with this story about Ernest Martz and Floyd Hull.
Yeah, sure. That was a really interesting case where the client was two children of Ernest Martz. He'd passed away some years before, and he'd been a little bit secretive about his past. Wouldn't say a whole lot about where his family was from, just that he was born in the Seattle area, supposedly at a logging camp.
Oh.
And he said his mom had broken up with her husband. There wasn't a whole lot of detail there. And his kids just wanted to know more about their father and where his family was from. So when we first got the case, we started digging into it, and we found that in the records, he'd given two different sets of names for his parents.
Wow.
Okay, this information came directly from him.
Yep.
Why would it not match? That didn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
All kinds of permutations, combinations of the names, nothing came up. We couldn't find these people anywhere. So we focused in on DNA tests. Fortunately, both of them had done DNA tests at Ancestry, 23andMe. And we started finding some close matches to a family with the last name of Hull. I'm like, okay, this isn't anywhere on their tree. What's going on here?
Really? So this is a third name now that's come up.
Yeah, one that didn't come from Ernest or from either of his kids. Nobody had seen this name before.
Okay.
So we started digging into this tree, and we zeroed on the family of Floyd Hull. And we found that the clients had matches on Floyd's mom's side and Floyd's dad's side. We're like, okay, when you see something like that coming together, usually it means that you're a descendant of both families, unless there's, some kind of weird case where relatives of both sides married somewhere else.
Sure.
We looked at the DNA that they shared with these people, and everything fit for them to be a descendant of Floyd's mom and dad. And so we checked into Floyd. Turns out he had the exact same birth date as Ernest Martz.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, I know, right? And then Floyd disappeared from the records about a year or two before Ernest showed up in Illinois. There's no connection to Seattle or Washington State or anything.
Wow. So was it known in the Floyd Hull family that this guy had just disappeared? Nobody knew what happened to him? Were there rumors of murder and intrigue and things like this?
Well, there actually was. There was a family tree by a descendant of Floyd's brother. He didn't have any documentation for this or anything, but he said that Floyd had died in South America sometime early 1920s or something. There's no newspaper or anything. I have no idea where he got the information from. But the family knew that Floyd had disappeared. They just had no idea what happened to him.
Mm-hmm. So at some point then this legend came about that he was in South America and died down there.
Yeah. I guess they had to have some reason to explain his disappearance, but it turns out he just completely fabricated a new identity. and sold that to his wife and to their kids. And his kids have the last name Martz to this day. That's just a completely made up name.
Wow. Are they thinking about changing it back to Hull?
I was wondering about that. I hadn't heard that they were. As far as I know, they were going to stick with the name that they were given.
Wow. So what was the wrap-up of this, and what was the response of the family when you gave them the big reveal that Ernest Martz was actually Floyd Hull, and he was supposed to be dead in South America?
Yeah, they were pretty surprised. I think for me, the icing on the cake was we were able to find a picture of Floyd in his younger years. He looked like maybe he's like early 20s or something. You know, he's like tall and confident looking guy. So it's just a total mystery why he left his family, why he changed his name. There's no court records or anything that indicate he'd gotten into any trouble or anything. It's just sort of like, you know what, I want to start over. Bye, everyone. Have a nice life kind of thing, I guess.
Wow, that's a good one. All right, what else you got?
All right. We had another one where a client named John, he had an unknown birth father. His mom had already passed away, and he wanted to figure out who his biological father was, where his ancestry was from, that kind of thing. So we started looking into it, and he had matches from somewhere in the southern U.S., and he had good matches. They all came together like you kind of hope they do in these kind of cases,
right,
where you want to be able to give the client some kind of answer. And so we were able to pinpoint his biological father's likely family. So we researched that family, and they had two sons that were of the right age to be his father. Unfortunately, both sons had already passed away several years before, but we were able to track down one child from each of those two boys.
Okay.
We put together contact information for those children, sent that out to the client. And at that point, we were basically out of time. So we said, here's what we have. If you feel like reaching out to these two, they might be able to give you some information to help you figure out which of the two brothers are your biological father. When you come to that kind of situation, unless you have a direct descendant of that person already tested, usually you have to go out and find somebody else to either do a DNA test or provide you the information to help you figure it out.
Sure, of course.
So some time passed. The client reached out to these children of the two boys eventually. And the son of one of them came back and said, you know, hey, my dad told me some years before he died that he had a relationship with a young lady, and she got pregnant, and they decided to end the relationship at that point. And the timing was right. The place was right for him to be the client's biological father. He's like, wow, you know, this sounds like they knew about me. This is really cool. And so then this son started going through his dad's old photo albums. He'd kept everything. Thankfully, I love it when they do that.
That's the best.
And he started going through his dad's old photo album. He said, hey, would you be interested in seeing some old pictures from my dad's old albums? And he said, I would love that. It sounds like we're siblings here. So, you know, the more information you can get about our dad would be the better. And so he started taking pictures with his phone and sending them to the client. And then he looks at these pictures like, oh, wow, this is cool. This is cool. And then the second picture comes in. He stops him. He's like, wait a minute. That's my mom. You've got a picture of my mother in your photo album. And you know, this son had never known who this woman was. He just said, oh, that's one of, you know, dad's old friends or girlfriends or something. It turns out that was the client's biological mother, and sitting in his photo album for almost 60 years.
Wow. And that kind of put a little bow on it, didn't it?
Oh, that did. He said, okay, now I know for sure that this is where I'm from, because the odds of that picture just randomly showing up are, I don't even know, astronomical.
There's no way.
So.
There's no way. And the other aspect is obviously you could have tested this guy to see what the relationship was, but that's pretty amazing, though, to find a photo of your mother in somebody's photo album. That's great. What a great story. All right, we got time for one more. Let's talk about the Bueller case.
Right. This one was another client who had an unknown biological father, and his mom had already passed away. He didn't really have a whole lot of information about who his biological father was. So he came to us, said, I've done DNA testing everywhere. Can you help me find my father's family? So we said, sure. We went through all of his match lists and everything else, and it looks like his biological father was Jewish. So we reached out to all these people, and we put together a pretty big family tree of who the client's matches were, but there wasn't really one branch that shared a lot more DNA than another. So it's kind of like, well, you fit in somewhere in here. We're just not entirely sure which one, because there's a couple of different places where you could fit. So we kept working on it. Time went on. And towards the end of it, we're kind of like, well, okay, let's just throw one more Hail Mary out there and reach out to all of your close matches one more time and say, is there any information you know about your family that could help us try and figure out how our client is related to you? And so a couple of them wrote back with, here's this, here's that. It's like, okay. One lady wrote back and said, I had this cousin that lived out on the East Coast somewhere, and he had a girlfriend named Bambi. And I remember that because the name was so unusual that he and Bambi had to visit us, and, they broke up and never found out what happened to her after the fact. So he saw the message on 23andMe's system. He's like, hey, wait a minute. My mom went by Bambi in the 1960s.
Wow.
Hold the phone here. And so we started checking in this guy, and he was in the right place at the right time. We double-checked the DNA. Everything fit for this guy to be the client's biological father.
Still living?
No. He had unfortunately passed away a few years ago as well.
Okay. Wow. So you're into the family at least. Now you got the lines, you got the whole thing the way it fit. Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing what DNA can do? And I don't get tired of it. I mean, supposedly it's kind of old hat at this point, but are you kidding me? Every time there's a breakthrough, there is a life changed and history created that's going to go on and on and on for generations. So thanks so much for the stories, Brant. Those are terrific and inspiring and fun and exciting, and look forward to catching up with Legacy Tree again next month.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
And coming up next, direct from jolly old London, Jonny Perl, who's rapidly becoming something of a legend in our space. He is the creator of DNA Painter. It's your chance to do a little chromosome mapping with a lot of color and maybe even break open some brick walls. He'll explain how this whole thing got started, some of the new tools that have come along that have enhanced the site. So hang on for that. It's coming up for you next in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Continuing to talk DNA on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. And my next guest is based in London, as you will certainly hear from his voice. He's a guy that all of us in the space have gotten to know over the last several years. He's the creator of an amazing website called DNA Painter. And Jonny Perl is our man. And Jonny, it's great to have you back on the show. It's been like over 3 years.
Amazing how long it's been, isn't it, Scott? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and we keep running into you, of course, at conferences, and you've really established yourself as a player in our field, and it's so great to have you back on the show. And for people who aren't familiar with DNA Painter, explain what it is, what it does, and how you got started doing it.
Sure. So DNA Painter is a website which you can find at dnapainter.com. And it's really a website for anyone who's taken an autosomal DNA test and is curious about some aspects of the results. I guess I'll embellish that statement a little more in a moment. It's a website that I launched back in the autumn of 2017. I had done a test just right at the end of 2016, and I was slightly baffled at how to understand the results. And I was interested in this thing called chromosome mapping, which is where you can assign segments of DNA that you share with a match to the ancestor that you inherited them from. That's a bit of a mouthful, but
no, that's well said. I mean, that's the short version of it and very precise.
So what you end up with is this rather beautiful tapestry of color, which is kind of a companion piece to your ancestral chart, your pedigree chart. You kind of have your genetic version of that showing who you inherited DNA from, which can be a very enjoyable thing to do. But I've also got other tools which are maybe a more practical use to people with immediate burning questions. So I did a big collaboration with a lady called Leah Larkin on a very popular tool called What Are the Odds? And that allows you to use the amounts of DNA that you share with different people where you know which tree they're in, you know how they're related to each other. You can then try to fit yourself into that tree based on those amounts of DNA. It uses probabilities and math to help you out with that. That's a very popular feature.
Yes.
And what else have I got? I've got lots of other features for genealogists, basically.
Well, you started this thing because of your own curiosity. You weren't much of a genealogist yourself up to that point. And I can't believe it's only been 4 years coming up this fall, because it's such a standard item in any genealogist toolkit these days. But what are the odds? Plus, you've joined forces with Blaine Bettinger, rolling out his shared centimorgan project, at least the latest version of it, and tied that into what's going on there. So you got math, you got science. It's really a piece of art when you consider that you've got, the 21 chromosomes all painted with different colors, each one representing a different ancestor or ancestral couple. What have you found has been most satisfying in this whole project for you, Jonny?
Honestly, I think it's probably connecting with people around the world. I was a genealogist going back maybe 10, 15 years, but I wasn't very connected to other people, and I didn't really know anything about DNA. So I've learned an enormous amount myself. And because I've kind of been asked to teach things to other people, that's helped me learn it even better, if you like. So
sure.
I've kind of come on quite a bit myself, and I've got to meet lots of great people around the world and interact with them. I've done conferences in Sweden, for example, and kind of cherished the connections I've made with people, really. That's been really, really great. Well, and to know that I'm helping people out makes me feel good.
Have you had some stories come back to you that people have discovered as a result of DNA Painter that you can share?
Sure. I'm not going to jump to any enormously specific ones, but I can tell you that the What Are the Odds tool has clearly had a big impact. I've personally used it myself to find 3 different people's birth parents now. If I was doing it full time, I'm sure I could have done more, but these are the 3 people who came my way. I have a good friend here in London whose mother didn't know who her father was. She knew he was an American GI, but that's all she knew. So I just tentatively said, no pressure at all, but if she would like to test, I think we can figure this out. And eventually, over a period of a couple of years, she did come around to the idea of testing. And yeah, it came pretty quickly. So I do find that tool very helpful. And I think probably that's the one that makes the biggest impact for people. One of the things you asked me, Scott, when we spoke more than 3 years ago was, can you just explain why people would do it and how it helps?
Yes.
And I remember pausing because I didn't really know what to say, because for me, it was just so much fun doing chromosome mapping that it didn't matter what it was for or how it would help. It was just because you can.
It looks good. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And of course, it is more useful than that. If you're super interested in inheritance and in the proportions that you inherited from each ancestor, it's fabulous. If you want to quickly identify a match who's on a different site from another match, then it's enormously helpful. But in terms of kind of immediate impact, breaking through those brick walls, actually the probability-based approach of What Are the Odds is probably of more immediate practical use. So I'm really glad that's on the site, because it's less artistic perhaps, but still very powerful.
So for people who are not familiar with the site, first of all, it's essentially free, but you have some paid features there, which people can delve into as they get deeper into it. But explain What Are the Odds? How does that tool work?
Okay, so if we imagine a situation, Scott, where I look on my match list and I see, say, 2 or 3 or 4 people who are clearly related to each other, and they're also related to me. That means that I'm in a tree which features all those people and me. But maybe if I don't know how I fit into that tree, I can do the genealogy work to connect those people, and I can build a tree down from a common ancestor. And then, so What Are the Odds allows me to hypothesize about how I might fit into that tree based on those amounts of DNA that I share. So in any one position in that tree, that might make me a second cousin to one of these people, a third cousin once removed to another. And so what Are the Odds will do, it'll suggest places in the tree where you might fit, and then it's going to score them according to which is most likely, mathematically speaking, based on those amounts of DNA. I'm probably making it sound more complicated than it is, because it's famously more hard to describe than it really is.
Yeah.
But it's a powerful tool that lets you see where you're most likely to fit based on those amounts of DNA that you share. Now, of course, you might not fit in the most likely place. Right. I tried it on myself, and it suggested I might be somewhere else, because, of course, inheritance is a bit random, and sometimes you might share, 200 centimorgans with a second cousin. Sometimes you might only share 60. So it isn't completely foolproof, but it helps give you this framework that lets you review what seems most likely.
Right. At the end of the day, it is a tool. and it points you in a direction, and it would just essentially rank where you want to investigate first, right? Okay, this is the one that the odds say are the most likely, so you research that. And if it doesn't pan out, then you go over to another one, the next level down, and try it from there. I think that would be great. What relationship ranges would you say it's most effective for, Jonny?
Very good question. Yeah, a lot of people will have identified a family, but actually that family they've only got very distant matches for. So there was someone in our Facebook group the other day who'd done a lot of research into a family, and they only had 20, 30 centimorgan matches. And I had to gently say to this person, well, actually, the DNA signal isn't strong enough. You know that you're related to these people, but from that DNA, from those amounts alone, we can't say if you connect at, fourth great-grandparent level, fifth, sixth.
Yeah.
It's really hard to be precise. So really, ideally, you want to have at least one match that's, say, 3 figures, that's 100 centimorgans or more. Mm-hmm. And even with that might be quite hard, because you probably have to go back to maybe third great-grandparent level, fourth great-grandparent, perhaps, to find the common ancestors. So it's most useful if you've got a few people above 100 centimorgans. But even if you've only got people on a lower level, maybe 40, 50, 60, it can still be really, really useful for mapping it out, because it's a simplified tool. If you imagine an ancestral couple, within what are the odds, it just has one person's name and then you can say their spouse. So it's a kind of simplified way of seeing a tree, and you can import a GEDCOM file into it as well. So potentially it's just a really nice way to visualize things. I know a lot of people do like it, and I find it a really nice, simple way to visualize it.
He's Jonny Perl. He is the creator and owner of DNApainter.com. If you're getting into DNA, you've got to take a look at this site, take advantage of the tools there. A lot of fun and a lot of practicality also in trying to achieve some of your goals. Jonny, great to catch up with you. Talk to you again in 3.5 years. Wait a minute. We got to do it sooner than that.
Let's do that.
Thanks for coming on.
Great.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert joins me once again for another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry have big news. They've completely redesigned the Ancestry mobile app. Now more than ever, the Ancestry app is your Genie travel companion. Check out their new photo line feature, where your photos are turned into an amazing collage you can share on social media. Under Discover, check out your daily picks that shows you the most relevant hints to your research and stories and photos that may be on other people's family trees. You can also click on Pick Up Where You Left Off to see the last person you are working on. And all of this works in sync with your desktop at home. And in sync with newspapers.com, find out what happened on this day in history. And if you want to know what happened on a given day in your family history, use the new widget, Events in Your Family Tree, that gives you ancestral birth dates, death anniversaries, and wedding anniversaries. Plus, check out the Maps feature that ties to your family history. Download the new Ancestry mobile app today.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, Genies, the masks are off, libraries and archives are opening up, and in part because of the pandemic, there are more records online than ever before. That means more opportunities for you to discover your ancestors and piece together their stories. Hey, it's Fisher, and if you haven't joined the official Extreme Genes Facebook group, genealogy and family history breakthrough strategies, there's never been a better time. Here's your chance to visit online with like-minded genies. This is the place for exchanging ideas on new sources, databases, DNA, and, well, strategies. Genealogy and family history breakthrough strategies got a whole bunch of genies through the pandemic and will only be better now that things are opening up. It's a great online community that gets better still when you become a part of it. Remember, sometimes it only takes one tip or idea to get your family research where you want it to go. Since it costs you nothing to sign up, why not join us? Genealogy and family history breakthrough strategies. All right, we are back on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show on ExtremeGenes.com. It is time once again for Ask Us Anything. David Allen Lambert has returned from Boston. And Dave, our first question today is from Athens, Georgia. Tad Smith asks, guys, I've decided to take my first crack at writing a family history. Good for you, Tad. What advice might you have? Boy, we could go for an entire show on this, couldn't we?
Oh, well, because it really depends what you want to include in your family genealogy. I mean, you and I have both been working on ours for years, and limitations are the only thing that you really have in front of you.
It's really true. I have written 15 or so of these books, and the thing that you have to understand is you first of all have to identify which branch of the family, how inclusive you want it to be. Do you want it to include all the descendants? Do you want to take the ancestry all the way back? Remember, genealogy is kind of a specific subcategory under family history. So family history includes a lot of stories as well as the charts and that type of thing. But you want to make sure also that you don't make it so detailed that younger people who might otherwise be interested in it will be turned off by too much information.
And that's true, because I think that a lot of times people think about how many generations they can go back and fill it with names and dates. But what you're really going to catch the next generation with are the stories. And it's really a matter of getting the stories that are going to entertain, preserve your family history, and not bore them to tears.
Yeah.
Every time your ancestors showed up in the tax rolls, it's probably not going to cut it. But when they marched off to Lexington and conquered, or the hero at Gettysburg, or saw Charles Lindbergh land a plane, that's what's going to catch them.
Exactly. And photographs, too. There are a lot of things that you can do to reach out to siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles to see what they might have in that department, because photographs are fabulous. And you can take those photos, load them up to myheritage.com. You can clarify them. You can clean up cracks. You can colorize them, even give them motion. Of course, you can't put that in a book. But nonetheless, there are so many tools there to help you make your photos much better. In fact, I just redid an entire history that I originally wrote in 1995, made some corrections in there, added some stories, re-indexed the whole thing. But all the photos, including those from the late 19th century, are in color now. And it is a whole different look than I was able to do back in the 90s.
Oh, sure. And the thing about photography is maybe you don't have a picture of an ancestor, but you know where they're buried. You can take a picture of their gravestone, or the house they lived in, or the church that they attended, something that adds a physical location, even if it's an empty lot that's now a Walmart parking lot, and you can have your child stand in and say, and this is where great-great-grandpas lived once upon a time.
Well, you laugh about that. I actually had an ancestor lived where there's now an old Sears parking lot, and the store itself is closed. So it's been abandoned by individuals and by corporations. So I don't know what they're ever going to do with that property that's going to last,
I don't know, maybe build your family's farmhouse back there again, and then they can actually just start it all over again.
I suppose. This is the thing. You got to limit to some extent how much you do. I would also advise that you make sure that you create an index for this book. It's very important that people are able to open the back and find a name they're looking for. So it's got to be accessible, interesting, entertaining, informative. Also, you might throw in a few documents that are really interesting. For instance, I added in this recent book the Declaration of Intention to become an American citizen with their signatures at the bottom. But you don't want to flood the book with those types of things.
And the thing about it is, if you can do something like this and include where you got the information from, sources are so important. Footnotes that we all learned when we were in high school, writing those book reports, are going to be useful. And the other thing is, if you have oral traditions, write down the source, who you heard it from.
Great question, Tad, and good luck with the effort, and we look forward to hearing how it's coming along somewhere down the line. Hey, we got another question coming up next when we return with Ask Us Anything in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Alrighty, back for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. My name is Fisher. That guy over there is David Allen Lambert. He's from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And David, this next question comes from Elena Jackson in Washington, D.C. And she says, Dave and Fish, my grandmother once told me that she worked on indexing a census during the Depression. It couldn't have been for genealogy. Any idea of why she might have done that? Good question.
Oh, yeah, actually, that is a government job that came up during the WPA days. In fact, the censuses that were indexed, actually, as genealogists, we take for granted completely indexed censuses now, but it all harkens back to when they started to index the 1900 census, then they did the 1920 census, and then the one you'd think they would have done first, the 1880 census, was done only partially. Now, the story about the 1880 census is interesting because that project began in 1940 and took until 1941, and it used 2 million hours of work and cost $1,100,000. So can you imagine 80 years later what it would cost to index all of that? Of course, now they're doing it all manually, and it's only partial. Now, do you remember the 1880 Soundex for the census?
Yeah.
Okay. Only indexed children under the age of 10 in the household. So if you had your great-great-grandparents alive, you had to trudge on through the films to find them, unless you lived in a small town. It was a hard thing to do until people like Ancestry and Family Search index these censuses for us.
So why in 1880 did they only do children from 1870 to 1880, the kids who were born in those years?
The story that was told to me is that because the Social Security Administration was coming out, any children that would be 10 years old or younger by 1880 would soon be retiring. And that way they would be putting in for Social Security. Now, there's a great article on archives.gov from 2002 called the WPA Census Soundexing Projects. And it talks all about this whole setup of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, that started back in 1935, and how they tried to get America back to work. Well, some of them were clerical jobs for both men and women, and they helped genealogists down the road. So, yes, your relative actually worked for genealogists today.
Yeah. Wow. So that's a good story. I'd never heard a lot of that information there, Dave. You know, usually when we think of the WPA and all the good things that came out of that for people who needed something to do, some way to make a living, they were building dams and roads and things like that. We don't usually think of them as being clerical workers putting together information on censuses from 50 to 60 years before that. That's amazing.
It is. In fact, what was the key thing that brought us out of the Great Depression? World War II.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Elena. Great question. We appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who sends us questions. We try to answer as many as we can. All you have to do is email us at askusanything@extremegenes.com. David, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.
Have a good vacation.
Thank you, sir. And that is our show for this week. Thanks so much to Brant Gibson from Legacy Tree Genealogist for coming on and sharing some of his stories of discoveries he's made as a DNA researcher working for his clients. And some of these things are just absolutely amazing. This is the thing about DNA stories. They never get old, and they're always just a little bit different. So you want to go back and listen to that if you missed it earlier on the podcast. Thanks also to our friend Jonny Perl from London, the creator of DNA Painter, for coming on and talking about how that all came about and some of the tools that you can use that are kind of recent to help you break through your brick walls. If you missed any of the show or you want to catch it again, of course, listen to the podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, TuneIn Radio, or Spotify. We are all over the place. Thanks for joining us. We will talk to you again in a couple of weeks when I'm back from vacation. And remember, As far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.